Okay, so again, these are the chapter review questions at the end of the chapter. You have access to them both online and on in the book if you have the textbook. So the first question, question 12, what type of receptor cell is responsible for transducing pain stimuli? Pain is associated with nociceptors. So B, nociceptors. If we wanted to know about stretch, we would say mechanoreceptor. If we wanted to know about pressure, it'd be an osmoreceptor. So like the things that detect blood pressure are called osmoreceptors. And then photoreceptors, that's a mystery. Light, okay? They detect light, okay? 13, which of these cranial nerves is part of the gustatory system? So this was a little bit tricky, and I didn't know this one off the top of my head, but it's the facial. And the facial has sensory information for taste, which is what gustation is. Olfactory is for smell. Trochlear and trochlear is for eye movement, and trigeminal is sensory to the face, but more of like the superficial. Number 14, which submodality of taste is sensitive to the pH of saliva? So this was a very like nuanced question. The answer here is sour. Number 15, axons from which neuron in the retina make up the optic nerve? This one has the name in it, retinal ganglion cells. Number 16, what type of receptor cell is involved in the sensations of sound and balance? These, believe it or not, are actually associated with mechanoreceptors. The reason it's mechanoreceptors is in case you get hung up on like the sound and balance thing, is because when you move, there's a gelatinous fluid that kind of causes those the hair cells that are found within the vestibule to also bend and twist and move. And so that's how that is being manipulated in regards to the mechanoreceptors. And the same thing with sound. It's a vibration. Remember we talked about the malleus, the incus, and the stapes? That's what we're doing. We're taking sound wave energy and converting it to a mechanical vibration. Photoreceptors, remember that's for detecting light. Chemoreceptors, these are actually what we use to detect taste, and they're chemical receptors, but it's also how we detect oxygen and CO2 levels in the blood. And then we already mentioned nociceptors. Other than the eye, did you guys happen to read what other organ has photoreceptors on it? It is in the brain. Good, perfect, yeah. The pineal or pineal gland is also referred to as the third eye, if you want to refer to it as that sometimes. But that's the gland that secretes melatonin. And it is sensitive to light receptors, which is interesting because it does not get light, at least shouldn't. But it responds to light. That's actually one of the things that helps to regulate your circadian rhythm, and why they tell you to get outside first thing in the morning, get some direct sunlight, and then, yeah. So number 17, which of these sensory modalities does not pass through the ventral posterior thalamus? And this one is going to be audition. And the reason for that is because it goes directly to the temporal lobe. It doesn't have to go down to the brainstem. Inferior colliculus, and the answer to this is the cochlear nucleus. I always like to double check that it's recording. Get paranoid. Number 19, visual stimuli in the upper left visual field will be processed in what region of the primary visual cortex? So the upper left visual field is going to be the inferior right. I will tell you, these are two that those last two are just like 18, 19. I'm not big fans of the questions. Number 20, which location on the body has the largest region of somatosensory cortex representing it according to the sensory homunculus? So whenever you say that word homunculus, remember that's that when they show you the picture of the brain and they show you like the enlarged like hands and lips and face and things like that, that's what they're referencing. So when we're looking at the different things that are there, think about the things that have the most sensitivity to them because it does say somatosensory. Okay, so it says lips, thigh, elbow, and neck. Okay, just think about the things, your own kind of experiences. Yes, you have sensation in all these areas, but it's the lips that are going to have greater sensation. Some of that is because you could actually put your lips up against something and kind of somewhat describe it versus if it's on your neck or on your elbow or your thigh. Don't confuse the different sensations. Like, you'd be like, well, I like it when someone strokes my thigh, but I hate it when I bang my elbow, or I like it when something's happening to my neck. And then of course I like the lips getting kissed and things like that. But there's more to it than that. Like it's also like what you can do with the sensations that are there. So think about the lips because you're bringing in food. And even before it gets into your mouth, your lips are determining like, oh, this is going to be a soft substance or a hard substance or a sweet substance or a salty substance. So it has some, well, I guess it's not really determining sweet and salty, but hot and cold and soft and hard and things like that. Number 21, which of the following is a direct target of the vestibular ganglion? That is going to be the cerebellum, B, cerebellum. 22, which region of the frontal lobe is responsible for initiating movement by directly connecting to cranial and spinal motor neurons? So with the motor, we want to be focused on motor, and you can see that you have a bunch of motor answers there, but when it's initiating movement, it's the primary motor cortex. The premotor cortex is basically what is going to tell say that some of you might get like, or maybe you've even experienced that before, like unfortunately, but like the whole purpose of that is just kind of, it makes you viscerally remember like, oh yeah, or like your brother touches you in a way versus your, significant other, like there's a completely different responses, right? Okay. I mean, hopefully, I don't know. If you're really in the Game of Thrones and you do you. Number 23, which extrapyramidal or pyramidal tract incorporates equilibrium sensations with motor commands to aid in posture and movement? Posture and movement is going to be affected by what's called the vestibulospinal tract. Yeah, B, vestibulospinal tract. So the biggest thing, the vestibulospinal tract is what's involved with equilibrium and proprioception. So all the other words are somewhat important, but these are just tracks that I asked you to label on the spinal column. And yeah, that's just one of those. Number 24, which region of gray matter in the spinal cord contains motor neurons that innervate skeletal muscles? Remember, motor's in the front, it's the ventral horn. Sensory's in the back, so that's the posterior or dorsal horn. So if I were to be tricky, or if I wanted to add an additional question, I could just change that to which region of the gray matter in the spinal cord contains sensory neurons that detect senses from the body. Then you could say dorsal horn. If I were to do something like that. Still A, yeah. Number 25, what type of reflex can protect the foot when a painful stimulus is sensed? And that is the withdrawal reflex. Your foot does stretch, but that's not going away from a painful stimuli. Your foot doesn't gag, and your foot doesn't have a cornea, so withdrawal reflex. Number 26, the name of the topographical representation of the sensory input to the somatosensory cortex. We already answered that in a previous question. That is your homunculus. Not Homo sapiens, not postcentral gyrus, and not primary cortex. Primary cortex, it's homunculus. All right, now I'm into the next chapter. So it's 15, I think. Question 7. Which of these physiological changes would not be considered part of the sympathetic fight or flight response? And this would be D, increased stomach motility. The reason for that is because the parasympathetic is your rest and digest part of things. Now, you may have heard like, well, I've heard someone get scared the crap out of them or whatever like that, or someone's pooped their pants like because they got so scared. Like has nothing to do with stomach motility or digestive motility. That's evacuating your bowels so you can get out of that situation. Some animals will do that as a protective measure, like they'll express their anal glands in order to kind of protect themselves, or I'm assuming also could be to attract a mate. I don't know all the ins and outs on anal gland expression. All I know is that the vet I wish Mia were here today. They kept asking, do you want us to express your dog's anal glands? I was like, I don't know. Doesn't she do that when she goes to the bathroom? Like, I hope so. All right. But fight or flight does involve the other things: increased heart rate, increased sweating, dilating pupils. These are the things that they try and use when they try and use like a lie detector test. And you guys should know that those are not scientifically valid and do not hold up in a court of law. So if you're ever worried about that, it's okay if you fail it. It doesn't mean anything. It's indefensible. Some people are naturally sympathetic, fight or flight, and it's hard to do that. If you take something to sedate yourself, then you might be able to pass the lie detector test. All right, which type of fiber, number 8, which type of fiber could be considered the longest? The longest in this selection here are the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. And if you look at like some of the autonomic nerve system charts, you'll see the parasympathetics have these really long things going right to the organ in which they're going to innervate. So that's what they're talking about, preganglionic. The sympathetics go down the sympathetic chain ganglia, and so those are all real short preganglionic, but long postganglionic, or longer postganglionic, but not as long as the preganglionic parasympathetic. 9, which signaling molecule is most likely responsible for an increase in digestive activity? So we just talked about digestive activity, and that is part of your rest and digest system, which is your parasympathetics. And your parasympathetics utilize acetylcholine. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline are all associated with your sympathetics. Number 10, which of these cranial nerves contains preganglionic parasympathetic fibers? This is I wouldn't have necessarily known this, but this is the facial nerve again. I don't know that I like that question. Maybe they're doing the facial. Maybe I will leave that one. Oh no, because hypoglossal seems like it's also going to be associated with gustatory. So I'm considering changing that question. Number 11, which of the following is not a target of a sympathetic preganglionic fiber? And it's the intramural ganglion, A. Number 12, which of the following represents a sensory input that is not part of both the somatic and autonomic systems? This is baroreception. Baroreception is detection of pressure. This is how you measure pressure of like your blood pressure. I think I mistakenly said osmoreceptors for that earlier. Number 13, what is the term for a reflex that does not include a CNS component? Short reflex. Remember, CNS means brain and spinal cord. So when you have like something like your patellar reflex, that's considered a short reflex because it does not need to go to the spinal cord or up into the brain in order to happen. It just goes right through the outskirts of the spinal cord, the sensory, and then the motor response. What neurotransmitter will result in constriction of the pupil? So this is where it's important to realize earlier on, we mentioned dilation of the pupil, and that's associated with somatic or the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, okay? So when your pupils constrict, that's more of a rest and digest sort of response. So that would be acetylcholine. Also, whenever you see norepinephrine and epinephrine together, they're part of the same division. So you wouldn't want to choose those. And serotonin, that's the next chapter. So serotonin has nothing to do with, that's a hormone, not a neurotransmitter. Number 15, what gland produces a secretion that causes fight or flight responses? Fight or flight responses, remember there's epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the other names for those molecules or neurotransmitters are adrenaline and noradrenaline. Why are they called that? Because they're secreted from the adrenal gland. Your salivatory gland secretes saliva, your reproductive glands secrete gametes, and your thymus secretes thyroid hormone. I'm sorry, thymus is involved with your immune system. Confuse thymus with thyroid. All right, number 16, which of the following is an incorrect pairing? The answer is acetylcholine decreases digestion, right? Because acetylcholine is associated with parasympathetic, which means increased blood pressure, again, sympathetic response, fight or flight. Norepinephrine increases heart rate. So those are all sympathetic responses if you're doing process of elimination. Number 17, which of these locations in the forebrain is the master control center for homeostasis through the autonomic and endocrine systems? This is called the hypothalamus. And if you recall my Ren from Ren and Stimpy analogy, the hypothalamus is Ren's mouth. So the hypothalamus is kind of like the neuro part, and then that pituitary gland hanging right off his lip is the endocrine part. And that's how they kind of interact. Interesting side note is that the literature did not suggest that there was a connection between the nervous and the endocrine system, I think, until the 1980s. There were people that were considered on the outskirts that were saying that there is or there must be, but it wasn't in the literature until, I want to say it's the 80s. It could have been in the 90s, but I think that was a different misconception. Number 18, which nerve projects to the hypothalamus to indicate the level of light stimuli in the retina? That's the optic nerve. Glossopharyngeal is going to detect taste. It's also going to detect what's going on in the heart. Oculomotor is just movement of the eye, so it's not sensing anything. And vagus is pretty much everywhere but the eye. That's digestion, respiratory, heart, you name it, it's vagus. And vagus is both sensory and motor. What region of the limbic lobe is responsible for generating stress responses via the hypothalamus? This is the amygdala. So when Colonel Sanders asked the water boy, why are alligators so ornery? It was not the medulla oblongata. Colonel Sanders was wrong. It's the limbic system, specifically the amygdala. And apparently in alligators and crocodiles, the amygdala is actually quite large, which makes them quite nasty. They don't look like cuddlers. Number 20, what is another name for the preganglionic sympathetic fibers that project to the heart? If you just know cardiac nerve, in fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and get rid of accelerator. I'm just going to call it the cardiac nerve. And if it's helpful, that's the only one there that even mentions a word that's similar to heart. The only thing you would need to know is that cardia refers to heart. 21, what central fiber tract connects forebrain and brainstem structures with the hypothalamus? That's the medial forebrain bundle. I don't necessarily like that question either. Number 22, a drug that affects both divisions of the autonomic system is going to bind to or block which type of neurotransmitter receptor? That is nicotinic. Your adrenergic, alpha and beta, adrenergic is only going to be associated with the sympathetic responses. Your muscarinic, I want to say that's acetylcholine only, but it's only one of the branches, and I that's the only one I'm not 100% of, like, because I always confuse if that's the one that causes contract, like to go into where you're in constant contraction or constant relaxation, but the answer is nicotinic. Right, if you've ever experimented with nicotine or used nicotine or at least looked into nicotine, you know that it both calms you down and gets you going. I think it calms you down because you have that need to have it. 23, a drug is called an agonist if it, and then the answer is C, acts like the endogenous neurotransmitter by binding to its receptor. So an agonist, right? So think of the word antagonist, right? The antagonist in a story is the villain. An agonist is going to help it along the way. Okay. So basically, this is something that's going to facilitate the response. I guess a good example of this would be like, so someone who's a type 1 diabetic and they require insulin. Their insulin they're receiving is not their insulin, it's an agonist, even though it's technically the same, it's supposed to be a similar enough substance, but it's binding to the insulin receptors in order to get the desired outcome because they're not creating insulin. Number 24, which type of drug would be an antidote to atropine poisoning? Forget that, but it's muscarinic agonist. Throwing that one out. Number 25, what kind of drug would have anti-anxiety effects? And it says alpha blocker. I don't know how I feel about that one. Number 26, which type of drug could be used to treat asthma by opening airways wider? This would actually be associated with a sympathomimetic drug. So B, sympathomimetic. Those of you who have me, that will have me for AMP2, we'll talk about this a little bit more directly. But the answer for that one is B, sympathomimetic. All right, last chapter. Number 6, endocrine glands. C, secrete chemical messengers that travel in the bloodstream. So that's actually the difference between endocrine, and then you'll see later on when you learn about the digestive system, exocrine. Exocrine secretes things out into areas other than the bloodstream. But if it goes into the bloodstream, it's considered endocrine. Number 7, chemical signaling that affects neighboring cells is called paracrine. B, paracrine. 8, a newly developed pesticide has been observed to bind to an intracellular hormone receptor. If ingested, residue from this pesticide could disrupt levels of, and the answer here is thyroid hormone. Intracellular hormone receptors. Number 9, a small molecule binds to a G protein, preventing its activation. What effect will this have on signaling that involves CAMP, which stands for cyclic AMP? And the answer is B, adenylyl cyclase will not be activated. And it's probably helpful that if you know that AMP stands for adenylene monophosphate. So that might actually just help out that answer. So 9 is B. 10, a student is in a car accident and although not hurt, immediately experiences pupil dilation, increased heart rate, and rapid breathing. What type of endocrine system stimulus did the student receive? And this is going to be C, neural. The way to think about that is what system was being activated there? They were in a car accident.
Adrenaline.
Yeah.
Adrenal, though.
Correct. But what part of the system is that? That's your sympathetics. Sympathetics secrete the adrenals, cause the adrenaline release, which is why it's neural.
Isn't neural like brain?
It is, yes. So I guess the way, because the hormones, because it's what caused the release of adrenaline, which you're right. Well, technically adrenaline's not a hormone, it's a neurotransmitter. So that's probably the other thing to think about. Remember, the other stress hormones that might cause this are called catecholamines, cortisol, things like that. And so they're not, sometimes they are secreted in conjunction with the adrenal, but the primary response here is the stress response, which is neural in response. I think this question was also intentionally tricky because you're in the hormone chapter and they wanted you to choose that hormone answer, but it's neural because it checks all the boxes for what we learned about with the sympathetics. Increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, pupil dilation, increased breathing, all that is sympathetic. The hypothalamus is functionally and anatomically connected to the posterior pituitary lobe by a bridge of nerve axons. So that's just how they're connected. Which of the following is an anterior pituitary hormone? That is the TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And I think you even answered that in your lab packet. Antidiuretic hormone comes from the posterior pituitary. Cortisol comes from the adrenals. And oxytocin, I think, also comes from the posterior pituitary. How many number 13, how many hormones are produced by the posterior pituitary? I just said ADH, but so the answer is 0. Let me just double check that.
That was 2.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to agree with that. So my key was wrong. The answer is 2, because I just told you 2. Does anyone know the alternative name for antidiuretic hormone? It's vasopressin. All right, number 14. So number 13, the correct answer is C2. I told you 0, but that was incorrect. Number 14, which of the following hormones contributes to the regulation of the body's fluid and electrolyte balance? That is ADH, C or B, antidiuretic hormone. You should know that one, right? Because what do diuretics do? Diuretics make you go pee, and it's typically given to people with high blood pressure to lower blood volume. Antidiuretic is going to make you not pee. Okay. Antidiuretic hormone is also associated with what's called diabetes insipidus, which has nothing to do with blood sugar. Okay. Also, people will use off-label ADH inhalants in order to learn rapid amounts of information in a short period of time. There are consequences for trying to do that, but it is something, a strategy for cramming. Not to be tried this semester. All right. Number 15, which of the following statements about the thyroid gland is true? All of them are true. So D, all the above. It is located anterior to the trachea, and it is inferior to the larynx. The parathyroid glands are embedded within it. It manufactures 3 hormones. So all that is true. Number 16, the secretion of thyroid hormones is controlled by the thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary. Number 17, the development of a goiter indicates that there is an excessive accumulation of colloid in the thyroid follicles. Now, the other thing is what's happening there in goiter is the person doesn't have enough iodine. And when there's not enough iodine, what happens is the need for thyroid hormone is being being demanded, but you can't synthesize it. So it literally builds up. So that's what they mean by excessive accumulation of colloid. Okay, it just means that there's a buildup of the potential thyroid gland or thyroid hormone that's not being secreted because of the lack of iodine. So this is one of the reasons why in the United States they sell iodized salt, but you get plenty of iodine from your diet. So if you don't consume iodized salt, you usually are fine here in the United States. Iodide ions cross from the bloodstream into follicle cells via active transport. Whenever you see that word active transport, just know it requires ATP. Number 19, when blood calcium levels are low, parathyroid hormone stimulates And this, what it stimulates is the activity of osteoclasts. D. Yeah, so actually, so there's two hormones associated with this mechanism, parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. Parathyroid hormone increases osteoclast activity. And remember what the osteoclasts do. They chew up bone and they crap out calcium, okay? Calcitonin, all it does is it tells the osteoclasts to calm down. It actually does not, nothing really affects osteoblast activity. That's just normal secretion of bone matrix, and that just happens no matter what. Which of the following can result from, this is number 20, hyperparathyroidism. So parathyroid does what? Increases osteoclast activity. So if I have hyperparathyroidism, you can weaken the bone, increasing the likelihood of fractures. There's a lot of tumors and other pathologies associated with hypercalcemia that could be affecting the blood. One of those being multiple myeloma. Lung tumors can lead to this hyperparathyroidism. There could also be other parathyroid tumors. There's different things that can actually lead to this. And so high calcium levels, and you might be like, well, what would that even, like, how would that manifest? It can affect your heart and how your heart is beating. So it could lead to arrhythmias and things like that. Number 21, the adrenal glands are attached superiorly to which organ? Adrenal, ad means on top, renal refers to the kidneys, so it's kidneys, C. Number 22, what secretory cell type is found in the adrenal medulla? This is just a terminology term, it's A, chromaffin cells. Cushing's disease. Cushing's disease is a disorder caused by abnormally high levels of cortisol. Does anyone know what the opposite of Cushing's disease is, or abnormally low levels of cortisol? It's called Addison's disease. No, B. It would be A if it were Addison's. And the reason I keep telling you these things, because that's the kind of thing I would do to like change up the question. So I would say Addison's disease is a disorder caused by abnormally low levels of cortisol. But the answer to 23 is B, abnormally high levels of cortisol. Another side note. My mom was diagnosed with Cushing's disease because she had a pituitary tumor. And so it didn't matter what they did to treat the Cushing's. It wasn't until they went up her nose and removed the benign tumor that she got her diabetes and blood pressure and all that kind of stuff that's associated with Cushing's under control. So basically her brainstem or her pituitary gland was telling her adrenal glands to just keep pumping out cortisol, your fight or flight or your stress response hormones. And yeah, and then it was kind of interesting. She did a complete turnaround, lost a whole bunch of weight, got her blood lab labels back to normal. Does that mean everybody who has Cushing's has a tumor in their brain? No, but it was just like interesting because anytime you get frustrated with the medical profession, just know that sometimes they don't know all the details and it's hard to find some of these things. Number 24, which of the following responses is not part of the fight or flight response? This is reduced mental activity. You might be thinking like, I don't know about that, but the reduced mental activity really kind of contributes to the fact that if you think about when you're stressed, you're thinking about 50 million things, this. So your mental activity is super increased. Whereas when you're in more of like a parasympathetic mode, it tends to be more kind of calm and focused. That's what they mean by mental activity. So you'd be in a reduced mental activity state when you're at rest, parasympathetic. So even though you may not like it, you actually do the most learning when you're in a stressed thing. I don't know about you guys, when I'm very comfortable, relaxed, and I'm trying to learn something, I fall asleep. When someone's yelling at me, you got to know this, you got to know this. Very, very motivating. No, I'm just kidding. What cells secrete, number 25, what cells secrete melatonin? Remember, melatonin is associated with the pineal gland. So B, pinealocytes. Number 26, the production of melatonin is inhibited by exposure to bright light. This is why they always tell you, like, if you have lights on in your room, if you have a TV in your bedroom when you're going to bed, you're looking at your phone. Michael, I think we talked about this, looking at the phone. It's okay. It's okay. You'll catch it on the recording. But you're good. No, I was just using you as an example for this. But anytime you are exposing, and this is why they tell you to use like blue light filters, turn down the lights, all that kind of stuff when you're trying to wind down and go to bed. This is probably more an issue for those who have trouble sleeping, right? So if you have trouble sleeping, you can look into the whole bright light exposure, things like that. Yeah, that's okay. You're good. Number 27, the gonads produce what class of hormones? Steroid hormones. Number 28, the production of FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, by the anterior pituitary is reduced by which hormone? Reduced inhibin. Inhibin inhibits. I'm glad they did inhibit instead of somatostatin, which does the same thing, but doesn't sound like it inhibits anything. The function of the placental hormone, human placental lactogen. So lactogen hopefully makes you think of milk, is to prepare the breast for lactation. So HPL. So unless taken exogenously, is produced only when there's a placenta present. Number 30, if an autoimmune disorder targets the alpha cells, production of which hormone would be directly affected? So number 30, the answer is D, glucagon. So what they're talking about, alpha cells, they're talking about pancreatic alpha cells. So I'm actually going to add that to the wording. The reason I'm saying that is because if you have an autoimmune disorder that targets the pancreatic beta cells, that would affect insulin. Okay, so alpha cells secrete glucagon, beta cells secrete insulin. So if there's an autoimmune disorder targeting the beta cells, what type of diabetic is that person?
Type 2.
Type 1. Type 1 means that the pancreas does not secrete insulin. And so they have to take it, they have to be in a pump, they have to take it exogenously. Type 2 is typically lifestyle related, where the cells are not sensitive to insulin. So that's when they need either dietary controls, exercise controls, and then of course metformin, and other glucophage and things like that, and even like the Ozempics and things like that are essentially diabetes medications. Number 31, which of the following statements about insulin is true? And the answer is B, insulin facilitates the movement of intracellular glucose transporters to the cell membrane. Number 32, the walls of the atria produce which hormone? Good, yep, B. Please don't get hung up on atria and then atrial natriuretic hormone. The only reason that would be confusing is, does that exist? Okay, but ANH, the atrial natriuretic hormone, which you'll learn a little bit more about in AMP2, it's actually what helps to regulate natrium. Does anyone know what natrium is? What do we call that in English terms? Or Na on the periodic table?
Sodium.
There you go. So now you know what sodium is actually called elsewhere. Well, not elsewhere, but that's where the Na comes from. It's natrium. Yeah, most likely. CCK, that cholecystokinin, that's associated with your digestive system. Renin is associated with your kidney, and calcitriol is associated with, that's a good one. I don't know. Oh, calcitriol, I think, is part of the vitamin D cascade. Number 33, the end result of the RAS. So it's probably helpful to know what that stands for. RAS stands for the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Again, this is AMP2 stuff. Bless you. So it's helpful to know what that is. So renin is going to be secreted by the kidney in response to low blood pressure. Okay. And then at the end of all that, and I'll save all the details for AMP2, at the end of all that, we're going to increase blood pressure. Yeah. So 33, the end result of the RAAS is to increase blood pressure. Now, let's say you had no clue, okay? Let's look at some of the things, okay? So you have reduced blood volume, increased blood glucose, reduced blood pressure, increased blood pressure. So when you're doing like process of elimination on a multiple choice test, look for the things that are opposite. So it can't they can't both be true, right? Or they both can't both be false. Reduced or increased blood pressure. So it's one of the two of those. Now, what you may not know yet, but you will know next semester, reduced blood volume also means reduced blood pressure. So those two are basically the same thing. And then blood glucose, the only reason you would think blood glucose is if you didn't know what RAAS stood for, which I'm assuming because it's in the textbook, they abbreviated it in the textbook, which is why they wanted you to know that. And this is why I'm telling you it stands for the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Problem is, you need to know that renin is coming from your kidneys, or renals. Okay. 34, athletes may take synthetic EPO. So EPO stands for erythropoietin. Okay, again, something we're going to talk about next semester. Erythro refers to red blood cells. So whenever you hear about athletes blood doping, this is what they're talking about. What they're doing is they're increasing the amount of red blood cells in circulation. That way they have more oxygen delivery capacity. And the reason that's important is because it gives them a competitive advantage for endurance type things. So this is what Lance Armstrong got in trouble for after winning the Tour de France for 7 times in a row. Yeah, or 7 times, or whatever it was, right? So he eventually got caught. Now, we'll talk more about the details of that because I thought it was an interesting story. But athletes take synthetic EPO to boost their blood oxygen levels, okay? If you're not an athlete and you take EPO thinking you're going to get increased blood oxygen levels, you will, but you also increase the risk of death. So don't do it, okay? And I'll tell you why he was taking it in the first place. It had to do with his cancer. We'll talk about that. 35, hormones produced by the thymus play a role in the development of T cells. So that's part of your immune cell development. Yep, 35A. 36, the anterior pituitary gland develops from which embryonic germ layer, and that's the oral ectoderm. Oral ectoderm. So 36 is A. And then 37, in the elderly, decreased thyroid function causes B, decreased basal metabolic rate. That's why old people are always so cold, right? And you're like, well, I'm always so cold. It's your metabolic rate that's affected. Okay. All right. Those are all the chapter review questions. Like I said, if I change a few of those questions, it's going to be what I gave you and told you here in class. I gave you some examples, but it wouldn't be a tremendous amount. I'll probably just stick to it so that way it can be a nice, short and sweet. When you take the test, after the test, you'll be able to, if the practical is still set up, you're welcome to take that as bonus. And then if it's not set up, then we just won't have the bonus. Again, we start at 9:30 on Thursday next week, December 12th. And I'm going to go ahead and start off this recording.